Okay, wrestling fans, we are back with another episode of PennLive's Wrestling Podcast. I'm Bob Flounders, joined by Jimmy Carlson. We specialize, and we should specialize, in covering Cael Sanderson's unbeaten Penn State program, who continues to roll at an impressive clip, Jimmy. But we also are going to do some things as this unfolds, just on the state of Pennsylvania wrestling. We've already talked to, a couple of people, John Fritz, Pat Santoro, and Jimmy and I were just talking about another special guest we're going to try and line up that isn't necessarily a Penn State wrestler, but a very, very intriguing guest if we can do it. But Jimmy, you just saw two impressive wins by Penn State over the weekend. Another shutout this time over Michigan, highlighted by Josh Barr's effort. 39-0. They didn't have to work hard for their home win on Super Sunday over Maryland, but unfortunately, Jimmy, there's some pretty significant injury news coming out of that. We have a lot we want to get to on this episode, but let's just start with what happened with Tyler Kasak. And I just wanted to ask you were up there. I did not go up. He had the injury default to a pretty good kid. He had a slight lead in the match. It looked like it might have been concussion related. My first thing when I saw that, Jimmy, was, did you think it was at all related to, it looked like he bumped heads with somebody from Michigan on Friday, or do you think this was a separate issue?
Well, it certainly could be related, Bob. Friday night against Michigan, it looked like he ran his head into Zach Matten's shoulder, and he went down. He did not leave the mat. They did enter concussion protocol. He didn't leave the mat, and he came back to wrestle and won. I think it was 7-2, something like that. Sunday, it was odd. I watched that thing on replay, and it looked like while he was trying to generate some offense, he was bringing Ethan Miller in toward him, and he hit his head on the back of Miller's head. But at the same time, I think Miller came up, and so that created the impact, and he went down like a rock. He was on the mat, I don't know, a minute or two. Then they took him off for concussion protocol, and then he didn't come back. And it was a pretty quick decision. So Cael said yesterday that he doesn't talk about injuries, especially something of that nature. But he said he thinks he'll be fine by the postseason, and if it were up to him, he'd be wrestling this weekend. Of course, it's not up to him.
Right.
Yeah, it's you can't mess with those kind of injuries, obviously. Getting outside of the injury front, then you wonder what happens in the Big Ten tournament with seeding. Kasak had a clear shot at the number one seed. Does Ethan Miller now get that number one seed? I think it's an interesting topic. He is unbeaten. He's ranked 6th. Plus, he has it is a win over Kasak, despite the fact it was a default. So it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds. And that would put Kasak and Ja'Cory Teamer of Iowa on the same side of the bracket. You'll have to wrestle them anyway, but usually you want your tougher matches in the finals just to get there.
Yeah, so it's very interesting, especially when you put it that way. The match that he had with Ja'Cory, kind of an iconic match into itself. Ja'Cory is still rounding back into form, but the way that Tyler finished that off, bloodied, having him in the air with one arm and his other hand up, it was pretty neat. But and there's also one other injury just to get to real quick. Penn State, I think it was for the 3rd straight match, did not have Braden Davis. I saw, checking out your story from Cael Sanderson's availability. We're recording this on Wednesday. From Tuesday, it read like Cael seems a little bit more confident that at some point Braden will go this week. That Penn State's going to wrestle at Ohio State Friday and then at Illinois on Sunday. He's a talented kid, but he's been away from the mat for a while. What's your read on that one?
He has been. I mean, it was an early season. The injury, again, while he doesn't get into specifics, I'm assuming that was probably aggravated. And Cael said if this were the Big Ten tournament this weekend, that Davis would be ready to, I think he said, rip and roll. But he also said he might wrestle this weekend, and then he said he might not. So we're not quite sure if he does. He'd either have Nick Buzakis or Ben Davino, both tough outs. And again, looking ahead, it's probably already too late for Davis to get higher than a 4 seed at the Big Tens. If that were the case, he would have the number 1 seed in semifinals. But yeah, it would be good to get him back for the team. if not this weekend, certainly against American. Just shake a little rust off and get ready for the postseason. Again, and the wrestlers like to emphasize this, even when they're off the mat, as long as they're working out in that wrestling room with, some of the workout partners they have, they are ready when they get back. It's not like they need a couple competitions to be ready and stay in shape. So I don't think they're looking at it as a huge concern.
Jimmy, as we roll on here on PennLive's Wrestling Podcast, I think we're far enough into the season. Penn State is 12-0. They are heavy favorites to win their 3 remaining dual meets. You mentioned American, Ohio State, and the Fighting Illini. So, very early on, like back in December when we started this, we kind of talked about, hey, this might be, when it's all said and done, this could be Cael's best Penn State team. If, contingent upon maybe them being at full health or in the lineup. Have you seen enough of this team to make an evaluation, or is it all about kind of how they finish up in the postseason?
Well, it's always how you finish, but yeah, I mean, it doesn't take a highly trained eye to look at
Right.
this team and think that, other years, clearly, they're going for their 4th straight title and 12th of the last 14 NCAA title, right? So each of those teams have been really good. But if you look at those teams, and you could pick out any year almost, and there were what you would call a hole or two in that lineup. All right, they had so much power elsewhere that those holes could be covered up. There are no holes in this lineup. It's unbelievable. I mean, the Minnesota, I forget the year, 2001 maybe, was the last team to have 10 All-Americans, and perhaps the only one. And that would be Penn State's goal again this year. They would never admit that, but it's something to aspire to,
Sure.
as it were. And certainly a very good chance of that happening with everyone healthy. But yeah, I would say, and they don't like to talk about it. Cael was asked about it Friday night against Michigan, and he quickly squelched that. But yeah, it's one of the best teams I've ever seen, and that includes a lot of the Iowa powerhouses.
Yeah. You just, I think they have. You said I think the Michigan shutout was their 5th, and as much as you could talk about the shutouts and that Michigan didn't get a takedown, it's really, I mean, that Iowa performance. I know that this Iowa team has some holes too, but to beat them that badly without having Davis in the lineup, just a phenomenal effort. They have 2 more road matches coming up, but let's talk about one individual matchup this weekend that I think a lot of Penn State wrestling fans will have circled, along with Beau Bartlett, probably, and Cael Sanderson and his staff. He gets another shot at his old buddy Mendez in the Ohio State match. I believe that they're on a collision course. He's in his way, right? If Beau wants to get to go where he wants to go, this guy's in his way. He's very good, but I think he had a little bit of a chance to talk to Beau, and he had a nice. Somebody asked him who his top rival was or who his best top competition is, and he internalized it. He said, it's always me. I like that approach because it shows the confidence that he has, number one, the experience that he has, but he feels like if he wrestles his best match, he can't lose, I think is kind of the implication there.
Yeah, he said his chief rival is himself, as you just mentioned. But he says he's difficult to scout. He says, people don't know what I'm going to do. People don't know how hard I wrestle. And the guy on the other side of the mat, just has to deal with that. Interestingly, each bout last year, and they wrestled 3 times, ended it with a 4-1 score. Bartlett took the dual meet here against Ohio State, and then Mendez in the Big Ten finals and the national finals won both of those matches off of counter takedown shots. Bartlett was on the offensive in each of those finals. There was a lot of hand fighting and pushing and shoving the first couple periods, but then the third period, some outstanding wrestling, some great counters on Mendez' part. But yeah, Bartlett is the one who was in very deep, especially in the national finals, had Mendez on his hips and somehow he was able to use those hips, get out of it, whizzer out, and come around. But it was incredibly two athletic performers there, in those two matches. But the scrambles again, I'm sure that'll happen again on Friday. And as long as I think Cael said Bartlett, has to know where his opportunities are, and when they come, he's got to capitalize on them. He always says you got to score more points, which is pretty easy to say, right? But it's when to strike, and that's what Bartlett has to do this weekend. Oh, and so if we move on from there, another good match on Friday is Levi Haynes and Carson Karchla.
Yep.
Haynes, of course, number 2. Karchla's number 5. Again, Haynes is certainly the favorite. He's just so steady. He might not. The last couple of matches, he hasn't scored early, but by the end of the match, he's up by 7, 8, 10 points, and it's as amazing as the score seems. Also, a couple of interesting bouts this weekend for Greg Kirkfleet at heavyweight. Nick Feldman, who's from Southern Lancaster County, on Friday night at Ohio State. Kirkfleet beat him 3 times last year. Each bout got a little closer, but again, the way Kirkfleet has handled everyone this year, he certainly should handle Feldman again. And then he gets Luke Luffman of Illinois on Sunday. And I'm not sure he's wrestled Luffman yet, but he's a little bit stockier, a little shorter. Again, just good test for Kirkfleet, but certainly ones that I'm sure he'll be successful in.
We're going to talk just a little bit about the nationals and some of the prices, and it's going to be, it's in Pennsylvania this year. But I had 2 for you regarding Kirkfleet. Reading what Cael had to say about him and just kind of the year that he's had, just steady, just seems like he's always in control. I know he's going to have to wrestle number 1, but it sounds like it feels like Cael is very focused, very impressed, with his focus, his attention to detail. He's not a guy that really has a lot to say, but he's an interesting guy to talk to. But it just seems like he knows exactly what he has to do this year if he wants a shot. And it sounds like Cael feels like he's on the right path.
Let me just read what Cael said yesterday about Kirkfleet. He says he loves playing with technique. I mean, every day he's trying new things. He's going into different matches, kind of with the mindset of doing something different, just because he can do that. I think his consistency is just something that really, really stands out about him, is what Cael said. And yeah, I mean, he's been here so long that next year Penn State will be looking for a new heavyweight, and right now it would be Cole Mirasola, unless someone enters the portal. And you never know these days if that can happen. Right now I'd say Mirasola has to put on some bulk, has to bulk up a little to fill those shoes.
Jimmy, one more for you. Unless I was looking at the Intermat rankings and ahead of this match, and is it me or is there a former? Is Edmund Ruth going to run into somebody that's going to be a rough customer on Sunday if he wrestles?
Yeah, he's a 184. Edmund, of course, from Susquehanna Township, brother of Ed Ruth, the 3-time NCAA champ from Penn State, right? And the whole family is named Edward or Edmund, or they're all Ed something, and which has always been interesting. Yeah, Ruth will get Starachi on Sunday, and that most likely won't end well for young Edmund, but it's a good test for him, and certainly will help. He's more than held his own, and in the Big Ten, just can't at all these. There seems there's always someone there that's just a slightly better, and this year, of course, it would be most likely Starachi. But yeah, I think this is it for Edmund. He's been around a while. And brother Ed, coached at Illinois for a couple of years. I don't believe he's doing that now. But yeah, it'll be a good match on Sunday.
Yeah. Okay. So after this, they have a home duel against American, but then it's the Big Ten tournament in Evanston, Illinois, home of the Northwestern Wildcats. Hopefully, you're not going to have to wrestle in that outdoor makeshift football field they had. I don't know if you saw it, Jimmy. It looked like there was a capacity of about 1,100 people at that venue. Penn State could probably, the Bryce Jordan Center crowd speaks to when they had 16,000, how many people would probably show up for that Penn State wrestling match if it was at Ryan Field, the former home of Northwestern. But let's talk about nationals in Philadelphia following that. Interesting that it's in Philadelphia, and also it's a hot ticket, right? You wanted to say something, I think, about the prices.
Well, it's been what, 4, maybe 5 years now. The NCAA has not offered public tickets. They are selling the NCAA experience, with lower bowl seats, center mat seats, food, drink, tickets, things like that. But for a minimum of like $2,300, which, that can certainly outprice the average college wrestling fan, in my opinion. Now, just yesterday, I think they have sold out of the experience tickets, but they're offering other lower bowl seats, and these were $2,800. So my point is, when it gets near to the nationals and they start going on various ticket sites, I think they're going to be outrageous. And whether you sell them as a series or take your chances and sell them match round by round, you won't get as much for Thursday as clearly you will on Saturday. But yeah, I think they're outpricing the fan, and it's just not wrestling. Some of these football tickets in the playoffs this year were very expensive. And you look at the Super Bowl. I mean, yes, that's apples and oranges, but it's just unbelievable how much you can charge these days.
Jimmy, so just to be clear for the listeners, the $2,800 is for the entire 3 days. It's not each day, is it?
It's a series ticket, yes, all 6
Okay,
rounds.
so you get for $2,800, you get to go all 3 days.
Correct.
Okay, yeah, that's still a lot, but yeah, that is. I would not have guessed that number. I'm glad you brought it up, but yeah, that feels a little bit like price gouging. Is probably the right way. And then once they put it, they're going to go on some. Yeah, they'll go on some sites, and it's going to go to the highest bidder, and it'll definitely be more than that.
And I believe it's been a few weeks now, but I saw if Penn State hasn't announced who's getting tickets and who isn't from their fan base. I think they're around, the series was $600 for teams, that the teams were able to offer, but the teams each year seem to get fewer and fewer tickets. And that's because the NCAA is taking them for that experience deal.
Jimmy, one more before we wrap this PennLive Wrestling Podcast episode. You and I did a video after the Michigan match. We were both up there, the shutout, and I don't know that everyone had a chance to see that, but I just wanted to circle back because I think that what Josh Barr has done this year at 97 as a redshirt freshman, when you consider who he's faced already, you know what I mean? 1, 2, and 5. I think the Lehigh kid, Beard, is 5. He has danced every hard dance already. And I just want to get, that's quite a resume that he has. His only loss was to the number 1 ranked kid, Buchanan, and it was 5-1. I felt it was a little bit closer than that. I'm just curious. I think he's up to number 3 now. He was 4, but he beat Cardenas of Michigan in a thrilling match. When you look at Penn State kids that are poised maybe to do some damage, other than the obvious choices, I think he could be having a pretty memorable March if he can stay healthy.
Absolutely. And he does seem pretty resilient. I'm not seeing, again, everybody this year's got some bumps and bruises, but he's been quite healthy. The Buchanan match, I think he was outhorsed a little. Buchanan was able to ride him for almost 1:10. That's how he got the extra riding time point, and he scored the late takedown. But yeah, for 5 minutes, that was dead even. And that, you can guarantee there'll be a different approach come the Big Tens, come the Nationals, from Barr toward Buchanan to even toward Cardenas if Ferrari gets in there. So yeah, it'll certainly be an interesting 197 when those big guys start rolling around. But Barr he's a goer. He's always moving forward, very aggressive, certainly knows what he's doing, and always aware, where he is on the mat, what he has to do, what time left, things like that. So yeah, it'll be fun to see. And also, Bob, before we go, if you recall, a couple of years ago, Samy Sasso, Ohio State, he ended up being at the wrong place at the wrong time in a convenience store robbery in Columbus, ended up being shot in the stomach, was completely, just so near death, underwent multiple surgeries, and now he's back on the mat. And it's miraculous. And his comeback's been nothing but inspiring. He's not quite the same Samy Sasso. Samy has won a couple Big Ten titles. He's a 3-time All-American, 4-time qualifier. And Tom Ryan gave a impassioned speech a couple weeks ago about that. And he said, Samy is not Samy, but for Samy doing what he's doing this year, it's just been inspirational for the entire team. So I asked Cael about that yesterday, and he said, I've watched a little bit. He's really impressive. Going through what he went through and be able to get back and compete at a high level is really, really impressive, is what Cael said. And we've talked about that a couple of times and he says that maybe I shouldn't say this, but some people beat him and they're flexing on him, and he just rolled his eyes. He says, the guy says it's a miracle he's alive. He's out there competing like a champ. He says, so it's pretty cool. So, he's earned the admiration, I think, of the entire college wrestling world. Again, like I said, he's finished second, fifth, and second in the NCAAs. Yes, at 12-7 this year. As I said, he's not himself, but what he's doing is really something to admire.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Who knows? Maybe one of these days we'll get him on the podcast. Like you said, he's been through a lot. We could run into him at nationals. Also, let's not bury. I'm not saying the co-lead, other than the remarkable achievement and his story, is that he's a Lehigh Valley guy, isn't he?
That's
is he
right.
not? Did he wrestle at Nazareth? Do I have that right
Nazareth.
or no?
Nazareth,
Yeah.
yes. Mm-hmm.
You can never count out a Lehigh Valley guy. That's my takeaway. So good for him. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of people rooting for him that aren't just Ohio State fans, but it is a remarkable story. I'm glad you brought it up, Jimmy. So road trip, Ohio State, Illinois. Maybe we'll see Braden Davis. I doubt we'll see Kasak, but I think cautious is the right way to go with him because he was beat up before he had that. He wrestled some pretty tough. Those are some pretty tough matches. So hopefully he'll be close to 100% when it gets serious. But Jimmy, good talking with you. That's it for this episode of the PennLive Wrestling Podcast, and we'll be back next week.